Hey everyone, Chess Dan here. Chess Dan 2.0, I should say. New and improved, better in every way. And what we're going to do here is we're going to go through one of my favorite games. It's one of the most beautiful chess games that you'll ever see, mainly because of one move, really. A queen sacrifice, which I personally think is the greatest queen sacrifice of all time. And yeah, let's get right into it. So this game was played between Averbakh and Kotov at the 1953 Candidates Tournament. This was a very famous tournament. David Bronstein wrote, who was one of the participants in the tournament, wrote a very famous book, the 1953 International Chess Tournament in Zurich, and this book analyzes every single game in this 30-round candidates tournament. I mean, it's pretty crazy. They played a full 30 rounds of chess over a couple of months, and yeah, Bronstein analyzed every game, and this game was really the jewel of the tournament. So without further ado, let's get into it. It began with d4. We have knight f6, c4, d6, knight f3, knight bd7, knight c3, e5, e4, and bishop e7. So we have the old Indian defense on the board. Now, a lot of you, when you play against d4 with black, will prefer to play the king's Indian defense, fianchettoing the bishop to g7 instead of bringing it to e7. There's nothing wrong with bringing it to e7. One might say it's a little bit less active there. It doesn't have quite the same potential as the bishop on g7, but you can get a nice position with black. The game can evolve into something a little bit more positional. Let's see how this game evolves. So Averbakh goes with bishop e2. We have castles, c6, and now white has a number of options here. At this point, most of the options score fairly well for white according to the Masters database in Lichess, and the evaluation is about +1 right now. That in general, with these types of Old Indian and King's Indian as well, white will always have a bit of a space advantage, and this is Stockfish likes space, so that's one reason why it tends to favor white in these types of positions. So Averbakh goes with queen c2. We have rook e8, rook d1, bishop f8, and now rook b1. And now the idea with rook b1 is obviously to play b4, so Kotov stops that with a5. And now we have d5, just further entrenching this space advantage that white has here. But of course, d5 gives the knight a hole to jump into on c5. We have bishop e3, queen c7, and now h3, bishop d7, and rook bc1, g6. We're in a kind of maneuvering phase of the game here. Both sides have kind of finished their development now and are looking for ways to create small advantages. So obviously that dark squared bishop for Kotov is not looking too hot there behind the pawns, so he plays g6 to kind of give it some more life. We have knight d2 from Averbakh, rook a b8, knight b3, and now we have an exchange, c5, king h2, and now king h8. And the idea behind king h8 will become apparent on the next move. So after queen c2, we have knight g8. So now knight g8 kind of prepares the idea here of f5, getting the knight out of the way of the f pawn, and well, it allows control of the h6 square, so maybe the bishop can come to h6, maybe the knight will come to h6. Some options for kingside play for black. And at this point, it's roughly equal. Nobody really has anything concrete here yet. So let's see how it continues to develop. We have bishop g4, and now indeed knight h6. We have an exchange of bishops, and now queen d2. The knight is under attack, so the knight has to retreat back to g8, and now g4. So white is saying, well, you can try playing f5, but I've kind of got a leg up on you already. I've got my own kingside pawn push going here. So black does play f5. It's kind of the only idea really in this position. I mean, there isn't really anything going on the queen side, so f5 is a good idea. We have f3 from white, and now bishop e7. And now we see white's plan here with rook g1. So essentially white is saying, I'm going to open up the board here. I'm going to open the g file. I'm going to try and exchange pawns in the center to create open files, open diagonals, and yeah, basically at this point, black wants to close the game, white wants to open the game. White's pieces are a little bit more active, white has more space. It's going to be nice for white if he can open the game. So black plays rook f8 here, and now before taking any pawns, white plays rook to f1. Stockfish doesn't really quite like it, would rather prefer white to just start opening the position right away, but alright, rook f1, not a bad move. But now rook f7 is just too passive here for black actually, and this is already much better for white now. It's too passive. Basically, black should have taken the opportunity there to close the position with f4, and now that black has not done that, white is going to tear things open. The best way to do that actually, for reasons that are a bit too complicated to fully get into in this video, is to take with the e pawn, but taking with the g pawn is not much worse. It's still a good move, and that's the way Averbakh decides to do it. It's more logical. You have the rook on g1, so you want to open the g file, and black recaptures, and now really white has to take that pawn. E takes f5 to continue with the plan of opening the position. Right here, open position is good for white. Any chance black has to kind of close things is going to be better for black, just mainly due to the way white's pieces are positioned. White has more space. If white can, for example, bring the knight to b5, the queen to c3, create some pressure along the long diagonal, maybe some mating threats, the pawn on d6 might be kind of weak. There's all kinds of options here for white. Instead, white goes for rook g2, and this kind of just throws away the advantage now. Now black can do exactly that, close the position with f4, and basically white's grand plans here are kind of ruined now, because now that the center is closed, black's kind of passive pieces don't really matter so much. It's it's totally fine for black, and actually might even be slightly better for black now. So really, white should not have allowed f4, but okay, that was allowed, and so now, well, you got to save the bishop, bishop f2, and black is going to play rook f6 here. It's a logical move. Bring the rook. The idea is to have the rook able to slide over to h6 and maybe deliver some threats. At least this is what it might look like, but there is actually a deeper idea behind rook f6, sorry, and that's going to become apparent on the next move. So white plays knight e2, and now we have the moment here, the big moment, the one that you've all been waiting for. Queen takes h3. I would call it a triple exclamation mark move, if such a thing exists in chess. It's one of the nicest sacrifices that you will see. I mean, okay, you can argue it's not that hard to see because black can force the king kind of to walk out, but really you can't really calculate a mate with this move. It's not immediately obvious that this is completely crushing for black. So there is a fair amount of intuition in this move, a fair amount of just kind of it just looks really nice, and it looks like it has to work, and that's why it was played. It's just a beautiful move, and basically, yeah, but white has to accept it. Going back to g1 is just like a concession that you're losing the game here. So has to take the queen, and now here come the checks. Rook h6, king has to come to g4. Now knight f6 check. If the king goes to g5, that's checkmate right away with rook h5, so the king has to come to f5. And now here you can see that this isn't necessarily such an obvious move, because you have a lot of options in this position actually. The knight can go to a lot of different squares to kind of make room for the rook to come to f8 and give a check. They're all good, but it's not immediately obvious that they're all worth a queen, but turns out they all are. So knight comes to d7, and now basically the threat is rook f8 check, followed quickly by checkmate if white doesn't find a way out of it. White does find an interesting resource here. Averbakh plays rook g5. This creates a kind of escape square for the king on g4 right behind the rook, but it's not really anything solid in the way of defense. We have a rook f8 check, the king goes back to g4, and now we have a knight check, the king has to come back, and now Kotov just kind of rubs some salt in the wound here. He just takes his time here. He delivers some checks where the king has no option but to go back and forth between g4 and f5. He takes a pawn, make sure the position doesn't repeat 3 times. that would be a draw. King goes back to g4, another check, and now he plays more moves to gain some time. Basically, I would go so far as to say he's kind of torturing his opponent here. He doesn't need to repeat all these moves. This is move 42, so he's past the time control here on move 40. He continues repeating moves. King has no option but to go back and forth. And now he takes the rook on g5. So the king takes the bishop, no other options really. And now rook f7, threatening checkmate in a couple of moves, basically with rook g7, rook f6. So now here's the part I really like about this attack. I mean, the whole thing has been pretty amazing, but the ending, basically you see the only way for white to, well, there isn't really anything for white to do, but basically white just has to give up his entire army to prevent checkmate. And the first piece to go is the bishop. So we have check and rook here. This is threatening mate again on h6. So he has to give up the bishop. And now we're threatening mate again with rook h5. So he's got to give up the knight. And next he plays queen takes d6 and another mate threat, queen b8, queen g8 blocking. There's really no defense against rook h6 check without giving up the queen for the rook. So basically, yeah, all of white's army just vanished there, trying to stop the checkmate. And yeah, at the end of the day, the best thing white has here is to give up the queen for the rook, and black is up a piece and a pawn, easy win, GG. It's so this was definitely what I think. Well, as I said at the beginning of the video, this, in my opinion, is the most beautiful queen sacrifice of all time. It really had everything because it had some calculation. Kotov had to see kind of the direct implications, but it also had some intuition. He didn't calculate the entire line out to the end. There's no way he saw all the way to this position that we have on the board here. There were too many variations in between that could have gone differently. So he played it with a bit of intuition just because it looked so nice, and it ended up working. Stockfish, by the way, takes up until depth 23 to find this move. Once it does find it, it recognizes immediately, this is about -6, -7. But it's not obvious to Stockfish. This is not something it finds at low depth. So yeah, there you have it. One of my favorite chess games of all time, and this has been Chess Dan. I really hope you enjoyed it.